There's a goddess in Greek mythology who was asked, as a child, what gifts she wanted from her father. Most children might ask for toys or treats or simple pleasures. Most divine children might ask for power or domains or cosmic authority. But Artemis, daughter of Zeus and the Titaness Leto, asked for something that would define her forever. She asked to remain a virgin for eternity, to never marry, to never belong to any man. She asked for a pack of hunting dogs, a bow made of silver, and nymphs to be her companions. She asked for mountains and wild places where she could run free, far from cities and civilization and the compromises that mortal and immortal women alike were expected to make. She asked, in essence, to be left alone, to be autonomous, to exist on her own terms in spaces where masculine authority couldn't reach. And Zeus, perhaps amused, perhaps respecting the clarity of her vision, perhaps simply relieved that at least one of his children wasn't asking to overthrow him, granted every request. Artemis became the virgin goddess of the hunt, the moon, wild animals, and childbirth. She became the protector of young girls and the patron of places where civilization ended and wilderness began. She became, in a pantheon obsessed with power and control and the endless dramas of who ruled what, the goddess who wanted none of it, who chose freedom over authority, who understood that the only way to be truly free was to remove yourself from the systems that sought to control you. This is her story, and it's nothing like the gentle, nature-loving maiden that modern retellings often present. Artemis was wild, dangerous, absolutely merciless when her boundaries were crossed. She was the goddess who would kill you for seeing her naked, who turned men into deer and set their own dogs on them, who demanded absolute respect and total autonomy, and was willing to destroy anyone who forgot that she owed them nothing. She wasn't soft, she wasn't gentle, she was free. And freedom, real freedom, is the most dangerous thing in the world. Let's start with her birth, because even coming into existence was an act of defiance, a struggle against forces that didn't want her or her twin brother to exist at all. Leto, her mother, was a titaness who caught Zeus's attention. They had an affair. Leto became pregnant, and Hera, Zeus's wife, eternally furious at her husband's infidelities, decided that this particular betrayal required punishment. Not punishment for Zeus, of course. That was too difficult, too dangerous. But Leto could be made to suffer. Hera declared that Leto could not give birth on any solid ground, not on any island, not on any continent, not anywhere that was fixed and permanent. Leto, heavy with twins, wandered the world desperately seeking a place to give birth, but everywhere she went, the earth refused her. Cities turned her away, islands rejected her. She was in labor, in agony, carrying two divine children who were ready to be born, and she had nowhere to go. Finally, she found Delos, a floating island, not technically solid ground because it drifted on the ocean, and there, clinging to a palm tree, Leto gave birth. First to Artemis, and then, with Artemis's help, because even as a newborn goddess she was already capable and strong, to Apollo. 9 days of labor for Apollo, 9 days of Leto suffering while her newborn daughter assisted, already acting as a midwife, already understanding what it meant to help women through the most dangerous, most sacred transition of bringing life into the world. That experience shaped Artemis profoundly. She was born into suffering, born into a world where her mother was punished for Zeus's choice, born understanding that women pay the price for men's decisions, born knowing that childbirth is agony and danger and that women need protection during it. And despite being a virgin goddess who would never have children herself, despite choosing a life completely separate from motherhood and marriage, Artemis became the protector of women in labor, the one they prayed to when bringing life into the world threatened to take their own. Because she remembered her mother's pain, and she never forgot what it cost to be born. But Artemis wasn't defined by sympathy or softness or gentle protection. She was defined by wildness, by the refusal to be tamed or controlled or made to fit into civilized expectations. She asked Zeus for eternal virginity not because she was pure in some abstract moral sense, but because she understood what marriage meant for women in ancient Greece. It meant belonging to a man. It meant bearing children. It meant existing within the household, within civilization, within structures of power that reduced women to property and broodmares and objects to be controlled. Artemis looked at that system and said no, absolutely not, never. She chose the wild instead, chose mountains and forests and places where human law didn't reach, chose a life of hunting and running and existing in spaces that were fundamentally ungovernable. She gathered nymphs around her, young women who also chose virginity, who also wanted freedom, who also understood that autonomy required rejecting the roles that society demanded they play. And she was happy. Or at least, she was free, which might be better than happy. She spent her days hunting with her pack of dogs, her band of nymphs following her through wild places, tracking deer and boar and living entirely outside the constraints that limited other goddesses. While Hera was trapped in her marriage, while Aphrodite was defined by desire, while Athena served Zeus's interests, while Demeter's identity revolved around her daughter, Artemis simply was. She existed for herself, answered to no one, owed nothing to the systems of power that ruled Olympus and the mortal world alike. She was the goddess of spaces beyond civilization's reach, and she embodied that wildness in everything she did. She wasn't civilized, wasn't domesticated, wasn't safe or predictable or willing to compromise her boundaries for anyone's comfort or convenience. And those boundaries were absolute. There's a story that reveals everything about who Artemis was, about what happened when someone crossed the lines she'd drawn. A hunter named Actaeon was tracking a deer through the forest. He was skilled, dedicated to the hunt, exactly the kind of mortal who might have earned Artemis's respect under different circumstances. But he made a mistake. He stumbled upon a grotto where Artemis and her nymphs were bathing. He saw them naked, saw Artemis herself, the virgin goddess, in a moment of vulnerability and privacy that she had never consented to share. And Artemis, without hesitation, without warning, without giving him a chance to apologize or retreat or claim it was an accident, transformed him, turned him into a deer. And his own hunting dogs, the animals that had been his loyal companions, his partners in the hunt, turned on him, chased him, caught him, tore him apart. Actaeon died, screaming, killed by his own dogs, transformed into prey by the goddess he'd accidentally seen bathing. Was that an overreaction? By modern standards, absolutely. The punishment far exceeded the crime, especially if it was genuinely accidental. But Artemis didn't care about fairness in the sense that we understand it. She cared about boundaries, about consent, about the absolute inviolability of her autonomy. She had not consented to be seen, therefore, seeing her was a violation deserving of death. End of discussion. No exceptions, no mercy for accidents or ignorance or good intentions. Her body, her space, her rules. And the consequence for breaking those rules was not a warning or a second chance. It was transformation into prey, death by the very thing you loved most. A message sent not just to Actaeon, but to every mortal and god who might think that Artemis's boundaries were negotiable. They weren't. They never were. And she would kill to prove it. This is Artemis at her most honest. Protection through preemptive violence, freedom defended with absolute ruthlessness, boundaries maintained through fear rather than negotiation. She wasn't asking for respect, she was demanding it, and the cost of failing to provide that respect was your life. There's something almost refreshing about that clarity, that refusal to soften or justify or make her requirements palatable. Artemis didn't care if you thought she was harsh, didn't care if you felt the punishment was disproportionate, didn't care about your intentions or your apologies or promises to do better. She cared about maintaining her autonomy in a world designed to strip it from her, and she maintained it through force, through the willingness to be exactly as dangerous as necessary to ensure that no one, god or mortal, ever forgot that she was not available, not accessible, not safe to approach without her explicit permission. But there's complexity in Artemis's wildness, layers beneath the surface of the virgin huntress running through forests. She was the goddess of childbirth, remember, the protector of women in labor. And there's something profound about that duality. The virgin who helps mothers, the goddess who will never have children herself, but who guides others through that dangerous passage. Because Artemis understood something crucial. You don't have to experience something personally to recognize its importance, to offer protection, to use your power to help people navigate transitions you've chosen not to make yourself. She helped her mother birth Apollo. She remembered that pain, that vulnerability, that moment when life and death hang in the balance. And she extended that protection to mortal women who needed it, who prayed to her in their moments of greatest danger, who called on the virgin goddess to help them survive bringing life into the world.
That's not contradiction. That's empathy across difference. That's understanding that autonomy means choosing your path while still being present for others choosing different paths. Artemis never married, never had children, never compromised her virginity or her freedom, but she also never demanded that other women make the same choices. She protected young girls, yes, guarding their virginity until they were ready to make their own decisions, but she also protected pregnant women and mothers. She helped with births. She understood that freedom meant having options, having choices, having the ability to decide for yourself what kind of life you wanted rather than having that life decided for you by fathers or husbands or social expectations or divine decree. She was the patron of the moment before commitment, the guardian of the wild space between childhood and marriage where girls could still be themselves before the world demanded they become wives and mothers. But she didn't punish women for choosing marriage. She just ensured they had time to make that choice consciously rather than having it imposed. Artemis had a twin brother, Apollo, and their relationship was one of the few genuinely positive sibling relationships in Greek mythology. They were close, genuinely close, allies and friends and partners in ways that other divine siblings never managed. Apollo was light and civilization and music and prophecy. Artemis was darkness and wilderness and the hunt and the moon. They were opposites that complemented each other, day and night, sun and moon, tamed and wild, and they protected each other fiercely. When their mother Leto was insulted by Niobe, a mortal queen who boasted that she had more children than the Titaness and was therefore superior, Apollo and Artemis responded together. They hunted down Niobe's children, all 14 of them, and killed them. Apollo killed the sons, Artemis killed the daughters. They murdered 14 children to avenge their mother's honor, to punish a woman's pride, to prove that insulting the mother of gods had consequences. It's brutal. It's horrifying. It's the kind of divine justice that makes us deeply uncomfortable because the punishment is so wildly disproportionate to the crime. Niobe bragged her children died, all of them, shot with arrows by gods who felt their mother had been disrespected. And Niobe herself was turned to stone, weeping forever, a monument to grief and the price of hubris. But from Artemis's perspective, from the perspective of a goddess who'd been born into her mother's suffering, who'd helped deliver her twin brother while Leto clung to a palm tree in agony, who'd grown up knowing that her very existence was punishment for her mother's affair with Zeus, defending Leto's honor was non-negotiable. Insulting her mother was unforgivable, and Artemis's response to the unforgivable was always the same: swift, merciless violence that left no doubt about the consequences of crossing her boundaries or disrespecting the things she protected. But let's talk about the nymphs, because they reveal another side of Artemis, a softer side that existed alongside the ruthless huntress. Artemis traveled with a band of nymphs, young women who'd sworn themselves to her service, who'd chosen virginity and wilderness and freedom from mortal expectations. They were her companions, her friends, her community, and Artemis protected them fiercely. When Zeus disguised himself as Artemis and seduced one of her nymphs, Callisto, Artemis was furious. Not at Zeus, because Zeus was too powerful to punish directly, but at Callisto, who was now pregnant, who'd broken her vow of virginity even though it wasn't her fault, even though she'd been tricked by the king of gods himself. Artemis cast Callisto out, and when Hera discovered the affair and transformed Callisto into a bear, when Callisto's own son nearly killed her while hunting, Zeus finally intervened and placed both mother and son in the sky as constellations. But Artemis? Artemis never forgave, never brought Callisto back into her circle, never acknowledged that the punishment was unjust.
It's one of the darkest moments in Artemis's mythology, revealing that her protection had limits, that her loyalty was conditional on absolute adherence to the rules she'd established. Callisto had been victimized by Zeus, had no choice in what happened to her, had been faithful to Artemis until the moment Zeus's deception made faithfulness impossible. And Artemis cast her out anyway, because the virginity mattered more than the circumstances, because maintaining the purity of her band required exile for anyone who broke the vow, regardless of how or why it was broken. Because Artemis, for all her wildness and freedom, had her own form of rigidity, her own lines that couldn't be crossed, her own inability to show mercy when her rules were violated, even by people who had no control over the violation. Or maybe Artemis was angry at Zeus and took it out on Callisto because that was the only target available. Maybe she knew exactly how unjust it was, but couldn't afford to show weakness, couldn't let one exception become precedent, couldn't risk her band falling apart if she acknowledged that sometimes circumstances matter more than rules. The myths don't give us Artemis's inner life in that moment, don't show us whether she felt guilt or simply cold certainty, but the result is the same. A victim punished for being victimized, a faithful follower cast aside, a goddess who claimed to protect women, upholding the same patterns of blame that the patriarchy used to control them. But despite these moments of harshness, despite the times when Artemis's rigidity led to injustice, she remained one of the most beloved goddesses in the Greek pantheon. Women worshipped her, especially young women on the edge of marriage, in that liminal space between childhood and adult life, who came to Artemis's temples to honor the freedom they were about to surrender, to spend time in her service before becoming wives and mothers, to experience wildness before embracing domesticity. There were festivals dedicated to Artemis where young girls would dance and run and perform rituals that celebrated their strength and autonomy before society demanded they channel those qualities into supporting husbands and raising children. Artemis was the patron of that brief window of female freedom, the goddess who said, "Before you belong to someone else, belong to yourself. Before you're defined by relationships to men, exist in wild spaces where your worth isn't determined by beauty or fertility or obedience." And there's something deeply moving about that role, about being the goddess who guards the threshold, who protects the space between what you were and what you'll be forced to become. Artemis couldn't prevent marriage, couldn't stop the system that turned daughters into wives and wives into mothers and mothers into vessels for men's lineages. But she could offer a pause, could create spaces where young women could experience something different, something wild, something free, could show them that autonomy was possible even if it was temporary, could give them memories of running through forests and hunting and existing without reference to male approval or male need. Those memories mattered. They sustained women through lifetimes of constraint. They whispered, "You were wild once. You were free. You belonged to yourself." And maybe, in small ways, in private moments, you still can be. Artemis's relationship with her brother Apollo reveals another dimension of her character. She was capable of deep loyalty, genuine love, real partnership with someone she trusted. They hunted together, they defended each other. They were equals in ways that most divine relationships never achieved. When Python, the serpent that had tormented their mother Leto, needed killing, Apollo handled it with Artemis's support. When their mother needed defending, they acted together. When either faced threats or challenges, the other was there. It was, in a mythology full of toxic sibling relationships and divine families tearing each other apart, remarkably healthy, remarkably functional. Two gods who genuinely liked each other, who chose to be in each other's lives, who found strength in their differences rather than competition. And that relationship proved that Artemis's wildness, her need for autonomy, her rejection of marriage and male authority, wasn't about hating men or being incapable of relationships. It was about choosing her relationships rather than having them chosen for her. Apollo was her brother, her equal, someone who didn't try to control her or claim her or reduce her to a role. He saw her as a full person, a goddess with her own domain and power and purposes. And she reciprocated that respect. Their relationship was built on mutual regard, shared history, genuine affection. It was everything that marriage in ancient Greece wasn't, chosen freely, maintained through mutual investment, existing without hierarchy or ownership. Artemis could love, could connect, could be loyal and devoted. She just required that the connection respect her autonomy, and Apollo did. But when her autonomy was threatened, when someone tried to claim her without her consent, Artemis's response was immediate and devastating. The giant Orion was a hunter, one of the few mortals whose skills rivaled Artemis's own. Different versions of the myth give different accounts of their relationship. Some say they were friends, hunting companions, equals in skill if not in divinity. Some say Orion tried to assault Artemis or one of her nymphs. Some say Apollo grew jealous of their friendship and tricked Artemis into killing Orion by challenging her to hit a distant target that turned out to be Orion swimming far from shore. Regardless of the specific version, the outcome is the same. Orion died, and Artemis, grieving or relieved or some combination of both, placed him in the sky as a constellation. Orion the hunter, chasing the Pleiades across the night sky for eternity, forever pursuing but never catching, forever hunting but never succeeding. That story, in all its variations, reveals the central tragedy of Artemis's existence. She couldn't have companionship without risking violation, couldn't get close to anyone without creating the possibility that they'd misunderstand, that they'd think proximity meant availability, that they'd cross the boundaries she'd established. Even friendship was dangerous when you were female, even divine, because men were taught to see women as potential conquests rather than people. Artemis had to be constantly vigilant, constantly ready to defend herself, constantly prepared to destroy anyone who forgot that her companionship wasn't consent to more. She couldn't relax, couldn't trust completely, couldn't ever exist without the armor of her wildness and her willingness to kill, protecting it. That's exhausting. That's the price of autonomy in a world designed to strip it from you. Not peaceful freedom, but constant defended freedom. Not relaxation, but eternal vigilance. Not joy, but the fierce satisfaction of maintaining boundaries against all attempts to violate them.
The moon became Artemis's symbol, her domain, the celestial body that represented her power and her nature. While her brother Apollo drove the sun's chariot across the sky, bringing day, Artemis drove the moon, bringing night. She was the light in darkness, the silver glow that illuminated wild places, the presence that accompanied hunters and travelers, and everyone who moved through the world after the sun set. The moon, always changing, always cycling through phases, never diminished by its changes, but transformed, becoming full, and then crescent, and then dark, and then returning again. Artemis was like that, constant but not static, powerful in all her phases, never less herself when she was hidden than when she was visible. The moon was hers alone. No one competed for it. No one tried to claim it or control it or reduce it to an extension of their power. It was wild space made celestial, wilderness elevated to cosmic significance, proof that autonomy could exist even in a pantheon obsessed with control and hierarchy and dominance. The moon was Artemis's kingdom, and unlike earthly kingdoms that required constant defense and political maneuvering and compromise, the lunar realm was simply hers, by right, by nature, by the same divine authority that made Zeus king of the sky and Poseidon lord of the seas. Artemis ruled the moon, and no one challenged that rule because the moon, like Artemis herself, was too wild, too distant, too fundamentally ungovernable to be worth the attempted conquest. But let's address the question that hovers over Artemis's entire mythology. Was she happy? Did choosing freedom over relationship, autonomy over intimacy, wildness over civilization actually give her a better existence than the goddesses who made different choices? The myths don't answer directly. They show us Artemis hunting and running and defending her boundaries and killing those who cross them. They show us her festivals and her worship and her role as protector. But they don't give us insight into whether she ever felt lonely, whether she ever wondered what she'd given up,
whether the constant vigilance required to maintain her autonomy was worth the isolation it created. She had her nymphs, yes, but even those relationships were defined by rules and roles. She had Apollo, but he had his own life, his own domain, his own concerns. She had her freedom, but freedom isn't the same as fulfillment, and choosing to exist outside systems doesn't mean you don't sometimes wonder what it would be like to exist within them, even as you recognize that choosing them would mean losing yourself. Maybe that's the wrong question. Maybe happiness, fulfillment, satisfaction, those are the wrong metrics for evaluating Artemis's choices. Maybe what she achieved was something different: integrity. The alignment between values and actions, between what you believe and how you live, between who you are and who you present yourself as being. Artemis never compromised, never pretended to be softer or gentler or more civilized than she was, never adjusted her boundaries to make others comfortable, never sacrificed her autonomy for acceptance or approval or love. She was wild from birth to eternity, consistent in her nature, true to herself, in ways that most gods and mortals never achieve. And if that integrity required isolation, if it meant being feared more than loved, if it cost her the kind of intimate connections that other goddesses experienced, well, that was the price. And Artemis, by every indication, considered it worth paying. There's a moment in Artemis's mythology that captures something essential about who she was, about what she represented. A group of men were hunting in her sacred grove, violating her wild spaces, killing her sacred deer. Artemis appeared before them, not to warn or threaten, but simply to exact justice. She killed them all, not cruelly, not slowly, just efficiently, arrows through hearts, death as natural as the deer they'd been hunting. And then she left, disappeared back into the wild. No speeches, no pronouncements, no attempt to teach a lesson or send a message or make their deaths meaningful. They had crossed a boundary, the boundary was enforced, end of interaction. That's Artemis in perfect miniature. Clear rules, consistent enforcement, no mercy, no explanation, no need to justify her actions because her actions were their own justification. She protected her spaces, she maintained her domains, she defended her boundaries, and anyone who thought those boundaries were negotiable learned otherwise in the final moments of their lives. The wild places Artemis protected are mostly gone now. Forests cleared for cities, mountains carved for roads, wilderness tamed and mapped and converted into parks and reserves and carefully controlled nature preserves. The spaces where you could run for days without encountering civilization, where you could exist outside human law and social expectation, where Artemis's wildness made sense and offered actual freedom, those spaces have been systematically eliminated, and with them went something that Artemis represented: the possibility of existing completely outside the systems that seek to define and control and manage every aspect of human life. We live in a world where there's nowhere left to run, nowhere beyond the reach of rules and regulations and social expectations. Artemis's domain has been conquered, the wild has been tamed, and we've lost something essential in that process: the knowledge that autonomy is possible, that freedom exists, that you can choose to live on your own terms even if it means being dangerous, being alone, being misunderstood and feared and rejected by everyone who benefits from your domestication. But maybe Artemis's lesson isn't about physical wilderness. Maybe it's about internal wildness, about maintaining spaces within yourself that remain ungoverned, untamed, true to your nature regardless of external pressure to conform, about drawing boundaries and defending them, knowing that defending them will make you uncomfortable to be around, will make people call you harsh or rigid or unforgiving, and doing it anyway because the alternative is losing yourself entirely. About choosing integrity over acceptance, autonomy over belonging, truth over comfort. That's the kind of wildness that still matters. That's the kind of freedom that's still possible even when the physical wild has been conquered. And it requires exactly what Artemis embodied: clarity about who you are, willingness to be dangerous when necessary, absolute commitment to your own boundaries even when everyone else considers them unreasonable.
The silver bow still exists in mythology, eternal and perfect, ready to loose arrows that never miss their target. The pack of hunting dogs still runs through the forests that remain, loyal to the goddess who chose them over marriage and civilization. The nymphs still dance in wild places, in the spaces between cultivation, in the moments before dawn and after dusk when the world belongs to creatures that don't follow human rules. And Artemis still hunts, still runs, still defends her autonomy with merciless precision, still offers protection to those who invoke her name, still proves that freedom is possible if you're willing to pay its price. She's the goddess who chose herself, who looked at all the options available to her, all the roles she could play, all the relationships she could accept, and said, "No, I want none of it. I want the wild. I want autonomy. I want to exist on my own terms." And she got exactly what she wanted, exactly what she chose. And if that choice meant being alone, being feared, being the goddess that people worshipped but didn't love, being forever outside the intimate connections that define most lives, that was acceptable. That was the bargain. That was freedom. And Artemis, virgin huntress, lady of wild places, protector of the untamed and the autonomous and the ruthlessly free, would make that choice again, every time, forever.